I mean, really, all we were doing was bringing the energy in, and the energy was doing the work. But what it felt like was that they were being shown what was on the other side. And so it was then easier for them if they were frightened, or, if they were fearful of what was going to happen. It just seemed to let them be able to let go. And I'd often offer it to the relatives as well. And they would say, like, wow, because obviously, they're really distraught. Their relative is dying, and they would often say that it feels like their head was below the water, but now their head was above the water. Like they still
Mm.
felt bogged down with what was going on, but just a little bit more able to deal with it.
Welcome to Conversation for the Soul. I'm Linda Christine. Today I speak with Denise Chadwick, and oh my gosh, this woman, I say this about everybody, but you know what? It's the truth. She's amazing, just like the rest of them. She is a voice alchemist, a crystal light activator, a code and grid keeper, a key holder, a light language practitioner and Reiki Master, and she shares all of that with us today. We kind of take a deep dive into grid work and how that's expanding and what's going on with that. And we also talk a lot about her past, her history, to when she started all of this back in the 2000s, when hardly anybody was talking about any of these things. She was actually in a hospital teaching other practitioners how to do Reiki on patients. Isn't that amazing? So anyway, we're going to get going today with Denise. This is a fascinating conversation, and I think you're going to like it. I want to hear all about it in the comments below. And please like, share, and subscribe. And if you wish to donate to this beautiful platform to try and keep it commercial free as long as possible, that information is posted below as well. I appreciate you all. Thank you. And here is Denise on today's show. Hello, Denise. It's so nice to have you here today.
Thank you, Linda. It's lovely to be here with you. Thank you. Thank you for this opportunity.
Absolutely, absolutely. And in true Conversation for the Soul style, we're going to get to know each other here via this platform. So I did sneak a little peek at your profile, which, guess what caught my eye was your dragon profile photo, because I am such a fan of dragons. Do you work with the dragons yourself?
Yeah. Yeah. And that particular, I don't know if you saw the comment on it, but that dragon is now in my garden. That's my profile picture at the moment.
Yeah.
And it's a lovely couple that mate those in the south of England. And I kind of wanted just to, it's nice if you can help people along a little bit. And at least one person bought one of those dragons after I got one and like shared about it online. So yeah, that is the story of my profile picture. But the story of the dragons, that started coming in for me on a different level in about 2006, 2005.
Wow.
Now, 2006 it would have been, and I started to write a young adult fiction book, which is still, it's still finished. It still hasn't fully been edited, but I know one day it will be. But that story was written, and some dragons were characters in the book. And I didn't know when I started writing the book that they were going to be there. In fact, I didn't know anything about the book when I started writing it. I just started with the words Daniel and Daisy. And I thought, all right, well, there's two characters called Daniel and Daisy. And one of the dragons popped in because there's a wizard college in it, and the dragon was in semi-retirement, and he has these little glasses on the end of his nose and he's reading a book, and he used to kind of guard the wizard school that's how his character came in, and he was a Welsh dragon called Morgwynnen. But as it turns out in the story, there was a dragon's egg to save, and that became the bulk of the story. Now, when I first started writing that, I wanted to write a story for my niece, because at the time, like, she's 20, 21 almost now, but at the time she was like 5 or 6 or something. And I wanted to write a story for her because I was living in Australia and I'd moved away from her. And I wanted to give her a glimpse of my life in Australia. So some of it was semi autobiographical. And one of my passions is animals. And I wanted to share some of the crazy, beautiful animals that there are in Australia and bring the amazing encounters with animals that I had over there into the story. So that was a lot of what was weaved in. And a lot of my friends at the time became characters in there, like they became some of the fairies. It was often how I used to kind of see them as their like elemental self. And then the last third, which was mainly about the dragon and the egg that was stolen, and they had to get it back in the earth. And it was a momentous occasion that this dragon was being birthed, because it meant that the energy, the frequency of the energy on the planet was of a certain frequency, a high enough frequency for a dragon to be birthed here. So that last third was just completely imagination. And I kind of got to know the dragons a little bit more that way. So it was a very friendly, like, to me, dragons are very powerful beings, very, very loving beings. Like, when I connect with them, what I feel is that massive unconditional love that they have for everything, but for us humans. And of course, there can be a fierceness with that, like creatures with their children, like there's a fierce protective instinct that I feel with the dragons. But I just feel them as loving, really loving beings. And I feel that they've been around much longer than we have. And I feel that anybody that does grid work on the planet is working with dragons, because they put the original lines in, like they work with energy, they work with the ley lines, the dragon lines. There's a reason why they're called dragon lines. So I feel, whether we know it or not, and we're doing grid work, we're actually working with dragons. That was a long answer.
Wow. No, it was a beautiful answer. And it feels like that last part of your book is probably going to be more documentary-esque here in the near future, because I feel like your statement, the dragon egg could be birthed once the vibration of the planet got high enough, could be a reality.
Mm.
Most definitely.
And I do feel that they walked the planet once, and I feel they've never left, really.
Yeah.
It's just that we can't see them in the same way that we can't, or not everybody can, see fairies and angels. It's the same principle, that there's a differential in the frequency. So because we appear quite solid and they're much more light, like that's just the difference in the resonance of energy. So that's why we may not perceive them anymore, but it doesn't mean that they're not here and they're not around us.
Oh, absolutely. When I've worked with dragons, the feeling is so overwhelming. It's like a Christ type love. It's so intense and full embodying that it just brings me to tears every time, in such a beautiful way. I wonder, what is the connection between Indigenous people and dragons? Because I feel like there's one, but I haven't quite figure that out. Do you know anything about that? Or do you have any sense on that?
I'm just trying to think back to some conversations that I would have had. Had a dear friend in Australia, who's an Aboriginal lawman. Like he's an elder, and a very wise man. And I'm sure we talked about dragons, because I think I would have asked him about the ley lines and the creation story, which is the rainbow serpent. So not quite dragon, but it could be that same energy. And I can't fully remember the details of the kind of birthing of humanity, like that story. But the rainbow serpent is part of that. Mm. And it certainly seems that many peoples of the planet, even the Welsh people in the UK, they have a dragon on their flag. Mm. It's their, it's their emblem. It's their being. And you could say that it's what's the word I'm looking for? That it's a metaphor, but I don't think so. It's too, look at China, like how important dragons are for them.
Yeah.
And how in touch they are with energy as well, and with energy lines of the body. Like, the meridians of the body are the same as the dragon lines of the earth.
Mm. So true.
I'm just going to see if I can take this off the wall, seeing as we're talking about dragons. So this was, that's funny. Let me just keep it in front of me.
Oh, is that Aboriginal?
No, I let me just take my background off for a second so I can show you this. Okay, none. Oops. Okay. So these, this, I draw light codes. So when I do energy work on the land, this is, I'm getting the, can you see my thumbs up in the corner? When I do like work with symbols and I do energy work on the land, this is kind of like the same thing, but it's drawn onto paper. So this is very similar to the actions of my body and my hands when I'm bringing energy through, if that makes sense. And what I do is draw light codes onto paper, and then I mirror them and then add lights to them. And this one I could never decide. It was like this long. It was just that. And I couldn't make my mind up whether to have it that way around or that way round. Oh, hang on, or that way round. So it occurred to me, wait a minute, I can put these two together and have it both. So that's what I did. And I see so much of a creation story in this. This is what this is to me. I see that in the middle as being an egg, even though technically it's not. A lot of the light codes that I do, I'm not drawing them to be a certain thing as I draw them, but when you mirror them, you can see the essence of something. So it's almost like, because I see a dragon here, that's the head. That's like the wings and the body. But I also see like a whale's tail there. I see like the sun. This feels like a creator symbol. It's masculine and feminine. This feels like the feminine aspect of it. So to me, this is a bit of the whales and the dragons I really connect together too. So it feels almost like a creation story, that you've got the dragon, which to me is like one of the primal universal beings. Like, I feel that's not just in terms of earth. I feel that's more cosmic. Giving birth through the egg And then I see many beings, like I kind of see a mouse there. And the dragon has like an octahedron heart that's spinning. That's the way that I see that in the chest there. And then these almost look like jellyfish as well.
Mm.
these ones. And again, you've got like the kind of fish or whale tail at the bottom. So this being looks like it's made of many different kinds of creatures, like an amalgam of many, many kinds of creatures.
That one looks like a phoenix to me, almost rising up into a giant
Yeah.
dragon face behind it. It's beautiful.
Oh, it's so funny. I look at these for so long. I've never seen that as eyes. That's what you mean, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah, with
Just
the
when you said
dragon
that, I went, oh,
tentacles coming off, yeah.
oh
And
my
then the
goodness.
phoenix rising up with
Yeah,
the fire
yeah.
emanating. That's beautiful. Now, you emulate that with your hands over the earth. How does that work?
Yeah, so when I lived in Australia, the last year that I was there, actually, no, let me rewind a bit. In 2005, when I first got to Byron Bay, I was working, I was staying at that time at a backpackers. I ended up working there. So I'd learned Reiki before I went. I was already a Reiki Master. I'd been on that kind of energy journey from December 2000, and I learned Reiki in the following May 2001. So I'd started my own healing journey. And when I started doing sessions there, when I started working with energy there, different actions would come through my hands, almost almost like I was weaving energy into the body, if that makes sense.
Like light language type of
Yeah, but I
movements?
didn't know that that was what it was at the time.
Okay.
Although it wasn't long after that. Byron is a very progressive town. Just the conversations that you hear there. It's one of those places where people know about energy. They talk about energy. You'll just overhear a conversation in the petrol station of, manifestation or letting go of things, like those wordings that you kind of get used to were just normal there.
Mm.
So I connected with light language because Byron Bay FM, which was the local radio station, had a lady on doing light language. And this was on a day where there was a threat of a tsunami. There'd been an earthquake, I think, in Thailand. So there was the potential of a tsunami. So it wasn't a warning of it, but it was almost like a pre-warning warning, if there is such a thing, that, there's no evidence of this, but it is a potentiality. So Byron Bay FM had someone on doing light language. And that was my first hearing of light language. And I remember having a session from somebody once around the same time, and she was singing into my body. And I realized now that she was doing light language. And it's funny that I do that now. Like at the time, I kind of just wanted to giggle. It just felt like a little bit awkward, even though I was using sound in my sessions. The idea of somebody singing into my body. And I had 2 sessions that were like that. And they were so powerful, so very powerful. And it's just interesting that my own work has kind of evolved into that. But at the time, it wasn't something that I was really familiar with. So I thought that I was kind of bringing different Reiki symbols through. But I realize now that the Reiki symbols are light language anyway. Like, it all is really.
Yeah.
So I didn't start speaking light language until 2011 was when the first words came through. But I realized that I was dancing light language through, and I was doing it in my sessions. So I learned to hula hoop when I lived at the backpackers, and that was a huge shift in my own body, like, just learning to move my body in a different way. And these things I started doing all this stuff with my hands. which maybe I'd done in the 80s to certain bands that I went to see, but this was like, it was different. And some written symbols came through as well that I just kind of like let them be. I didn't really do much with them. I thought they were going to have more, I was going to use them more like, further down the line. Now, Byron, possibly the whole of Australia, but certainly Byron is felt to be Lemurian energy. So I think there was something about me going there and like locking in to the energy framework there that opened up a lot of different things for me. So the light language was one of them, and just being in that space of a different frequency of people that lived there, and that you're kind of with, that you're surrounded by. So yeah, Byron was a huge time in my life. Like, it was an amazing time. I learned to use my voice. The backpackers where I worked, there was a talent show there, and the level of talent that came through and stayed at the Arts Factory was incredible. Like, there were so many amazing musicians. It wasn't like a really amateur talent show. It was like, whoa. And you could see the light in these people's eyes. You could feel the light coming through the voice. It was just incredible. And I kept finding in all the different places that I lived that I'd be living with musicians. And the first time that I really used my voice that led to me using it in terms of energy was one time when I lived in the house where I wrote the book, and it was called the Hideaway Hill House. It was this magical place in the rainforest. It was on top of the hill. You could see the ocean and the lighthouse down there. Like, it was just incredible. And I went from living in a tent at the backpackers for 10 months and 2 months in the dorms to living in this like millionaire house that was owned by the owners of the Arts Factory and was for sale. So we might have just had a month living there, but I actually ended up living there for almost a year and a half. And it was the most incredible time. Like, the rainforest there was like original rainforest. It was very pure energy. There were waterfalls there. It was just a magical place, which inspired the book. I thought the book was going to be called The Hideaway Hill House at the beginning, but it turned out that it was about dragons, not the house. So where was I going with that? Yeah, so I'd lived in many different houses, and there was one day living there that I could just feel there was emotion in my body that I wanted to release. And I was trying the usual ways and it wasn't working. And I just felt that I needed to do something with my voice to get this stuff out. And I tried like doing a bit of a scream, and that just ended up like hurting my throat. And I thought, well, that's not really useful. And I had a lot of throat stuff, a lot of constriction in my throat. I never used to sing, and I never really used my voice that much. And so I got pillows in front of me, and I just made this like om sound. And I kept doing it in the pillows because where we were on the hill, potentially you could hear it in the things in the valley below.
Wow.
So I was doing it in the pillow for ages. And then after a while, I was just like, put the pillow down and just let my voice come out. And that was a real turning point. And then I started like singing in my car and just strengthening my voice. And after that house, I think just about every house that I lived in after that, almost every house, there were musicians living there. So they'd be like practicing, playing the guitar and singing, and I'd be harmonizing with them, hiding away in my bedroom because I didn't have the courage, to say, can I harmonize with you? And they'd have been so open to it, but I used to just love harmonizing. I love the sound that harmonies make. But there was one friend, and we lived together I think this would have been 2010. She is an amazing musician. And I asked her if I could harmonize with her. So we used to practice together, and we were practicing Jolene together.
Oh, I love
And
that
she,
song.
and it was like her version of it, like it was quite different. Um, and she ended up getting like a showcase thing where on a different night from talent show, she was playing 4 songs, and one of them was Jolene. So I went, oh, listen to my listen to my voice going as I speak about this. So I plucked up the courage to go on stage with her, and my knees, like my legs, were almost buckling. I was so frightened, like, of doing that. Um, but it went well, and I ended up recording some backing vocals with her on her first album, and then with a few people after that, I plucked up the courage to sing with them and harmonize with them. But I can't really do lyrics that well because I'm very right brained when I'm
Oh,
singing in that way. It's and I can't remember. I just can't remember lyrics. Um, but yeah, that was quite a journey, and then I started using my voice in my sessions too. And then the light language, it was kind of tones, just tones and frequencies that were coming through at first, and then light language started coming through more. There was one sentence in 2011, and then nothing for 2 or 3 years, and then it started coming through more. And then what I started off saying in all this, you were asking about the body light language. So in 2016, this is my last year in Australia, and I lived in a garage that was on the road where the beach was. So you crossed the road, you went through a park, and you were at the beach. And this particular day, I'd been using my crystal singing bowl and I was chanting with it. And suddenly, this huge amount of energy started coming through. And I was guided, and I could hardly keep my eyes open. And I was guided to go and have a shower, which I did pretty much like this with my eyes closed, and then walk down the beach. And again, mainly I was walking down with my eyes closed because this energy was just so super strong. And this was at the time when whales would, the whales went north, and then they had their calves, and then they would come back south, and they would often come into the bay with the calves. It was
mm.
such a special time. I really connected with the whales that year,
Oh, I bet.
and I felt them helping me with this, with what I was doing. And there was a tea tree lake, is a sacred women's place, and that's where I was going. And not so the tea tree lake was just at the back of the beach, so just at the start, not actually at the lake itself, but just as you kind of turn off to go into this, I was guided to bring this energy through, and I was doing things with my body that I'd never done before. And it felt really huge. And so those are the activations. That's kind of what I do with the land. And what I'm shown is that it creates crystalline roses. And I saw
Mm.
that in Glastonbury when I was there last year. I was doing some of this energy work at Chalicewell Gardens, which is a sacred gardens. It's a very, very special place. And as I was doing it, and kind of sometimes there's this kind of action, you're doing spirals and
Yes.
almost chopping it into the earth. And as I was doing that, I could see these layers of rose around me that you kind of do that action, and then it just goes and gets dispersed. It gets, I don't know, sent down the energy lines or whatever. Um, but that's what I mean when I say that that's what I'm doing. So some
Wow.
of it is kind of like lightning bolts, some of it's, actions like this, lots and lots of spirals, and there's always a lot of spirals in the work that I do. Um, but yeah, that's almost a snapshot, I guess, of some of the ways that I kind of see energy or perceive energy as it's moving through the ethers and through the ground. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally makes sense. Now, when you're working with the earth and you're doing the light language with your hands, are you also verbalizing it as well?
Yeah, normally.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, is it something that just comes on spontaneously, or do you go out with a purpose?
Either or, quite often.
Okay.
Um, where I'm living now, so I'm in the north of England, and this place where I'm living, the garden. This was an old pub. It's a very, very, very old house, and it's divided into two. And I've like got about a fifth of the house or a quarter of the house at the end. And it hasn't been a pub for many, many years, but there were piles of rubble in the garden from. It's maybe 300 years old. This house, like it's an old
Wow.
house. And I think when it was a pub, they just used to throw all the bottles like in a pile. And if any of the buildings fell down, all that just got thrown into piles. So there wasn't a garden here when I first moved in. There was piles of rubble. And they'd already taken away 10 tons of rubble. And there was another
Mm.
15 tons of rubble to take away before it could be a garden. So it's almost like virgin earth in a way. So it's needed a bit of work to clear the energy of just being unloved, really. But also, I've created a spot at the end where grass was sown, and I've put 6 roses there because I work strongly with rose energy. So there's kind of like a geometric pattern that's created by the way that I've planted things in a similar way to how I would do a crystal grid, but I've put the plants kind of like that. And when people step on there, they're kind of like, whoa. People who are sensitive to energy can really feel that there's something quite big going on there. And I feel this is to do with the rose lines of the earth, which I feel that there's this network of lines. And I feel that deep in the ground, there are more of these lines that are kind of coming up to the surface now. And the Earth's energy lines, because of all the solar and cosmic energy that's being brought to Earth, the ley lines are growing. They're all increasing in size. There's a really interesting man called Rory Duff. And this is something that he shares about, like him and other people that he knows over the world measure the lines. And do work with the energy lines. And he's been saying that I think it's more than they've doubled in size, the energy lines. Like they've really grown a lot since 2017 particularly. And my feeling on the rose lines is that I don't know if this is a full rose line or if it's like a tributary, because I feel that happens. You've got this light arteries and veins in the body. You've got the bigger vessels, but you've got the smaller vessels that come off that. And I feel that that's what there is in the garden. And I work with Gaia when I do this. It's not just me coming in and forcing something onto the land. It's a real collaboration, and I'm merely the vessel, the rod that is needed to kind of anchor these frequencies in. And when I worked at the Arts Factory and I was doing all this stuff, for years I'd be like, I wasn't really quite sure of the bigger purpose with it. And what I got in my last year there was that this was kind of like a different frequency of energy that was being brought in. I'm not saying I'm the only person that was bringing it in, but it felt like it was laying a layer on the earth grid. And because I was working at a backpackers where people travel, so if they receive a treatment, they're carrying this energy, and then when they step on the land, wherever they go, that frequency is taken to all the different spots.
That's beautiful.
And I thought, what a genius idea of the universe to plonk me there. Because I kept trying to leave and I was always brought back. It was like, no, it's not it's not time. It's not time. There's more work to do.
Hmm. Now, why rose lines? What is that connected to? I feel like
I,
I might know, but I'm not sure.
I feel like they're the heart lines.
Okay.
So I feel, yeah, I don't know exactly. Like there's a because the main ley lines are to do with the geometry of the earth, and it's not like they're a line really. They're a line in terms of they go along, but they're not just on the surface. They go all the way down and they go all the way up as well. But most of the nodal points are part of the geometry, like the sacred geometry of the earth. So where lines of the sacred geometry come together, that would be where there's a nodal point. And the rose lines to me it's almost like that structure is masculine and the rose lines feel quite feminine to me. Is that your feeling of them as well?
I just felt that there might be a strong Magdalene connection.
Yeah, that too.
Um,
Yeah.
that's immediately where my knowing went, was to that. And the feminine makes complete sense.
Yeah. Yeah, and the Sisters of the Rose, that came into my awareness in 2016 as well. And I've worked with rose energies for a long time. There was a book by, I think it was the Pleiadian Workbook by a lady called Amora Kuan Yin, which I got hold of maybe in 2002, 2003. And she brought the idea of working with rose energy, where you visualize a rose. If you're triggered by somebody or there's a situation that you've been through that you still have charge relating to, or that you haven't let go of and you're working with forgiveness. So you visualize this rose and you put the situation into the rose, move it kind of out of your aura. And I think she had it that you dissolve it, that it kind of like almost, my image of it is that it blows up, and I felt really uncomfortable with that. So I would like blow on it and just have it dissolve. And then she'd have you do it again, see the rose again, put the person's face in it or the situation in it, dissolve it, and just keep doing it until you don't have a charge. And the rose energy has been coming through so strongly for me. I made some rose oils last year from the roses that I'd planted in my garden. And rose energy itself, which I feel that the rose is a frequency and the rose flower is an aspect of that frequency. So it's like bigger than the flower. It's a whole frequency, and that there are almost like rose guardians and rose fairies specific to that energy as well. But it feels very cosmic, the rose. Like I don't feel that it just is an earth thing. It feels like it's been brought to earth for a reason. And it's such a special flower. It's such a divine flower. Like you smell it and it just lifts things.
Yeah.
It's such a beautiful, beautiful fragrance. And it just seems so right. Like the Sisters of the Rose couldn't have used anything else, I don't think, apart from a rose. It feels to be the highest. I mean, lilies and jasmine are very beautiful as well. But there's just something super special about the rose. And the fact that it has thorns, it's almost like this protection of such a divine being.
Mm.
And I'd like to think that it will grow without thorns in the future, that it won't actually need the thorns.
Yeah. Wow, when you say that, I can totally visualize it being the rose being an off-planet flower. Completely, completely makes sense. And I'm sure I've heard the rose oil is like the highest frequency oil.
Yeah,
That
yeah,
and frankincense, I think, are pretty up there.
yeah.
Wow.
It's almost like frankincense is the masculine and the rose is the feminine.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, I do love frankincense as well. And with rose energy, if there's any areas of your body, any of your energy centers that you're feeling are out of balance, the rose is kind of guiding me to fill it up with roses, like just
Mm.
energetically visualize roses in those areas. Visualize yourself within a huge rose. There's so many different ways that we can play with
Yes.
these energies and be, just use our imagination with them, be creative with them.
Mm. Now, were you born in Australia or were you born in the UK?
I was born in the UK.
Okay. Because
Yeah,
you almost sound like you have an Australian accent more than a UK accent.
I did. In Australia, everyone said I sounded really English, but when I came back here, they're like, "Oh my God, you sound Aussie."
So, and the thing that kind of strikes me about you, Denise, is that you were starting to do this before a lot of people were doing it. I mean, you were kind of probably like a lone ranger out there. I remember taking Reiki classes back around the same time you did in the early 2000s, but doing absolutely nothing with it. I mean, it was just kind of like dip my toe in, okay, I'll play with Reiki on my dogs, and that's about it. But you really were in hot pursuit of a spiritual path at that time, and a lot of people weren't. How did all this come to be for you?
Mm.
Were you that
Yeah,
way
great,
from a little kid, or did you grow into it?
great question. So my mum became a yoga teacher when I was 3. So my mum and my dad both learned yoga, but my mum used to teach it. And this was in the 70s, like late 60s, early 70s. But by the time she was teaching it more to bigger groups, it was in the 70s. And this was not done, especially, it was quite a narrow-minded, quite a small-minded town that we lived in. Um, but I feel that my dad, especially, well, both of them were looking for something more. Like religion didn't kind of quite cut it for them. So we went to church on Sundays, and I remember having some quite strong experiences with the organ music and with singing. Like I remember feeling quite elated when I left church, which I think had more to do with the singing than anything else. Um, and I used to have experiences, of knowing things before they happened. I remember, and I went to be a nurse at 18 as well. I remember dreaming of patients and having, very clear things happen and then phoning up because it was so real and finding that, those things had happened. And I was really quite open to that world because that was kind of how I'd been raised to a point. Um, and then being in that scientific medical model environment, and also a guy that I started seeing when I was 22, and he did not believe in any of these things at all, and put this other point of view that I'd never really heard, of a scientific point of view of this is all by chance. When you're dead, you're dead. There's no God, there's no creator, there's nothing of that. And if it's not proved by science, then it's not right. And I couldn't argue with that. And I really fully had a 360 switch.
Oh.
And then when my dad died, I think I was about 24, and I remember him coming to me in a dream, and it was so real. And I said to him in the dream, "But you're still here, but you're still alive. I know you're dead, but you're still alive." And in the dream, I was like, they've got it all wrong. I've got to write to all the medical journals about this and tell them they've got it all wrong. And I said to him, "So what's it like when you die?" And he said, "Come on, hold my hand. I'll show you." And we were flying towards this. I think it was a pink sun, And it was really amazing. And then my ex, as he is now, but my partner at the time, coughed and woke me up. And I was just like, no, obviously I wasn't ever going to, wasn't actually fully going in there. So that was a little bit of a, And those times when you're just falling asleep and you hear someone say your name and it wakes you up and you don't know if you dreamt it, you don't know, but you really heard your name and you're kind of like looking around the room for who's just spoken to you, because that's the time when the veils are thin and those beings on the other side will, try and get your attention, and in dream time as well. My mum gave me the Celestine Prophecy book, and I remember reading that and kind of going, whoa, there was a lot in that book. There was a lot of feeling in my body. And Carlos Castaneda, the teachings of Don Juan and talking about the filaments and energy. And there was, that did things to me as well, reading that book. And my ex had a music studio and we listened to happy hardcore music. So it had this like repetitive drum beat that was pretty fast. It was like something like a 240 BPM kind of thing. And a little bit of dabbling with ecstasy, with MDMA at the time. So, and that to me is a real heart, third eye connector. And my ex took it first, and he had these mystical experiences with them. But I was very resistant because I'd already had this 360. I didn't want to like have another. I was like, no, I'm quite happy with believing what I believe at the moment. But then we had these telepathic experiences. We had these like remote viewing experiences, these feelings of leaving your body, going places where traveling to places. I remember flying over, I think it was like prairies in Saskatchewan. That's what it feels like it was. And seeing this almost like this shed there and looking in the window. And then someone turned around and looked at me and I was like, whoa. It was just this weird thing of like, what is happening here? Like, am I really doing this? Is that actually a scene that I'm really tapping into? And there were all these like geometries in the visions, all sorts of things really. And I was still nursing at this time. And yeah, it was huge and I couldn't really deny it, but even so I wasn't quite ready yet. But then a friend whose judgment I valued, and my mum had done Reiki for a few years, and I was like, don't come near me with that hocus pocus nonsense. But my friend, I was round at her place for dinner. She wanted to practice on me. She'd just done a level 1. So I was like, okay. And all I had to do was lie there for an hour. So I thought, well, if it makes her happy, I'll do that. And then when I came round from it, and the energy, I could feel all these things happening in my body. I could feel heat. She wasn't even touching my throat, but it felt like she was. And the heat from her hands was just incredible. And this was in December 2000, and I really resonated with the energy. So I bought myself a book on Reiki that Christmas and was doing it on myself, even though I hadn't been attuned. And then the following May, I got my attunement, and that was it. Like I could feel the energy. I started getting into crystals. I'd hold crystals in my hand and be like, it's tingling. Put it down. It's not tingling. Put it back. It's tingling. And, the scientific part of me wanted validation, really. So I started doing it on anybody that would stay still for long enough. Basically, I became a little bit evangelical about it, but was doing it on patients and actually got permission to do it on patients in the big teaching hospital where I work.
That's a big deal.
It was. This was in 2002. So my Reiki Master was already doing it in the gynae hospital. There was one of the doctors there was open to it. And especially with people who are very unwell, palliative care or whatever, So my Reiki master and me became a little team that were kind of doing Reiki on patients, and we trained something like, I think it was something like 167 members of staff. And Jacqueline, my Reiki master, actually ended up having to stop because she had an ovarian tumor, and so I kind of took over. And when she was opened for the tumor for the surgery, it already seemed to have spread, and it looked like she might be for palliative care. Really, like they did, I think, radiotherapy, but she's still alive now. She's like in her
Wow.
80s.
Wow.
So she felt that all her negative energy was in that tumor, and it being taken away had actually shifted a lot of energy in her own system. So I became the Reiki person in the hospital, and this was quite an interesting story. So my friend who had introduced me to Reiki, we did our level 2 together, and then 6 weeks after that, she had a massive subarachnoid bleed, and she ended up in ITU. But it was a huge bleed. Like she was never going to make it. Like it was really just a matter of time before she passed.
Hmm.
But all those people that she'd introduced to Reiki and who'd learnt it themselves were all doing Reiki on her in ITU. We were doing it on, because it was a big event, her passing. She was very well known in the hospital. She used to work in A&E, and A&E nurses, because they take patients to all the wards, tend to be known. And she was such a beautiful person as well. Like it really, and she was only 38. So it really touched a lot of people's lives. So we had a little memorial service for her, and the two head nurses wanted to speak to her mum because they wanted to do something to honour Yasmin because it had been such a big thing. And so I went in with the meeting because she was a bit nervous. Her mum was a bit nervous about going on her own. So I went in with her, and they said, "What can we do?" And we said, what Yasmin would have liked better than anything was if we could introduce Reiki to the hospital. And I did some on the two senior nurses so that they got it, so that they understood what we were asking. And I remember doing it like getting on my knees on the floor and doing Reiki through the shoes. So I didn't say take your shoes off. The shoes were on, and my hands were on top of the shoes, but they could feel the heat. They could feel the energy coming through the shoes. And to the scientific mind, that's like, whoa, that doesn't really make sense. But you know that there's something going on. So that was kind of how we, as nurses, kind of snuck Reiki into the hospital, because it was a big teaching hospital. Like it's not, and very closely affiliated with the medical school, which was just down the road. So, but because I had like a sister's uniform, so a nurse manager uniform on, that gave me a little bit of credibility with the doctors, because it was nurse-led teams that would ask me. So palliative care, nurse liaison teams, pain control teams, they would be the people that would ask me to go and see patients. So we kind of bypassed the doctors a little bit. But if they happened to be there, I'd say who I was and who I'd come to see and introduce myself and say, I'm more than happy to do some on you if you like, so you know what I'm doing. And most of them are like, no, dear, that's all right. You just go and do your, imaginary thing, whatever they were thinking. But you get the odd one that would be like, yeah, all right then. I remember one was like writing in the notes as I'm doing it, and then he kind of like just put the pen down and received it. So yeah,
Wow.
that was a real honor, and especially for people end of life, with palliative care, there's what an honor to be able to, I mean, really, all we were doing was bringing the energy in, and the energy was doing the work. But what it felt like was that they were being shown what was on the other side. And so it was then easier for them if they were frightened, or, if they were fearful of what was going to happen. It just seemed to let them be able to let go. And I'd often offer it to the relatives as well. And they would say, like, wow, because obviously, they're really distraught. Their relative is dying, and they would often say that it feels like their head was below the water, but now their head was above the water. Like they still
Mm.
felt bogged down with what was going on, but just a little bit more able to deal with it.
Mm. I just think of the ripples going out from all of that, of all the people that you taught who then took it somewhere else and then maybe showed someone else. Wow.
And even in the arts factory, because I worked there for 12 years, I I've no idea how many sessions I did in that time. A lot of them were mini sessions. I used to just charge $1 a minute, and people could choose, depending how much money they had, how long they had for a session. And most people were a bit like, well, I'm going to do this because I don't believe it. Or they were like, I'm traveling, I'm open to trying new things. It's what traveling is all about. And there was maybe only 2 or 3 people out of those that didn't really feel very much, one of whom cried pretty solidly for the next 2 days. Um, so I think something
Yeah, I
was
think she felt
something
something.
was going on. But most people would sit up and go like, "Oh wow," because they're in a different. I mean, it's a different brainwave. Everything is different, and you're in that space between awake and asleep that you've maybe never been in before. And I had this outside space that was completely impractical. I had the path to the campsite on one side, and I had the car park on the other. So it wasn't quiet. There was often there was a regular like drum workshop just not that far away. There was a didgeridoo workshop over there. It
Oh,
was
jeez.
noisy. The backpackers, they're not quiet. Um, and sometimes the noise would disturb me, but it most often didn't disturb the person on the table because they were just in this really deep space.
Mm.
And then you're able to share, you know, your findings on the energy centers. So everybody there, their base chakra was out of balance. There was only 2 people in all that time that the base chakra wasn't that out of balance. And I was like, whoa, that's weird. Because obviously your base chakra is to do with money, possessions, work, feeling grounded, feeling connected to the earth. And when you're traveling, you're really challenging that. You're all over the place. And flying, you can get so ungrounded flying. So I remember saying to the 2 people, "Oh, that's quite unusual here." And both their families, they'd come from like traveling families, or their families had moved to many different places. So for them, being on the move was actually normal. Mm.
Wow, that is fascinating. So, okay, so this led you up to the early 2000s, and then how did everything start to progress after that to where you are now?
Um,
Because you do a lot of such a variety of different things.
so the sound started coming in. I had chimes. Actually, even before that, I would clap over the body to clear energy. So I was aware that sound and energy work well together, and that sound can really shift. Do you know what else was amazing? Because I have this outside spot, the cicadas there are really loud. It's like an alarm. It's a very high pitched
Oh,
sound.
they're loud.
So so loud. So when a female cicada would fly over, all the males would like make their call, and they also used to do the call at sunset. But I would, and sunrise, like the change in temperature would make them do it as well. But I would find that if an area was really stuck, they'd start and it would clear the energy in the body. And I was like, that is really weird.
Oh, wow.
But it makes absolute sense because, you know, there are so many sound healing creatures, the birds, the whales, the insects,
Mm.
like, there's Lions, I've realized recently as well, like the roar of a lion does
Oh.
amazing things to energy. Um, so the sound, I had these chimes that I would put on the body. And when I first started with those, it was interesting because if the energy was blocked in the body, the chime wouldn't resonate. It would do this like plinky sound, like that almost sounded a bit out of tune as well. And
Hmm.
I think the chime was broken, and I'd lift it off the body and it would start with the resonance. I'd put it back down and it would like get muffled, which actually makes a lot of sense because if there's a lot of dense energy in that spot, then the sound waves can't get through. So I used to say to people that the chimes, the sound waves, if that's the blockage, they're all kind of like pummeling this until it gives way. Um, so the chimes I'd used for a while. I learned something called Anubis Reiki, and we were encouraged in that to use our voice in sessions.
Hmm.
So that was where I started like chanting into the body. Um, I'd already had the sentence of light language before that, I think. It was probably around the same time. So, yeah, that was where the sound aspect comes in. The light language and the written codes came in. I never really used to see what I was doing with my hands. Sometimes I get a sparkler. If I had a sparkler in my hand, I'd be like, okay, now I'm going to do it and see what it looks like. So it would give me a bit of an idea what it looked like. But I just had an idea that it was light language, that there was some kind of written form of it. And so I looked it up when I came back to England in 2016 and realized there were other people doing that. There was a Facebook group called Keepers of the Codes, and it was quite a small group back then. And so connected with a few different people and realized I wasn't the only one. Because when I was doing these activations pretty much every day, for months before I left, like I'd be called over to the beach in the morning, I'd have my chai tea, and then I'd just do like a light language activation, and I'd feel amazing.
Hmm.
And it was also a way of releasing stuff in my body. Like if I was feeling a bit like, it was an amazing way of just shifting that energy too. Sometimes it would be very fluid and soft, and other times like it would be quite, quite a masculine, like quite a more forceful, a more fire energy and less water. Um, and I remember thinking, surely there's other people around the world doing this, but I didn't know of anybody at the time. But it was really different Facebook groups, and then connecting with Sology. This started its life as a superabundance code for Todd and Sology. I
Oh,
did like a
wow.
set of superabundance codes for them, and that was one of them. Um, so yeah, the connections and realizing, and now there's so many people doing, speaking light language and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, it's just been a natural progression, and working with the land is something that has been with me a long time. I remember one time in Australia, I gardened for my accommodation as well for a while when I was living at the backpackers. So I used to do a meditation a week for my accommodation, and I also used to do gardening. And one time I was up in this amazing, majestic fig tree, and I was getting the message to do like an attunement on the tree, and I'm like, now come on now, really? And that was like I had to do it. I was sitting up in the tree's branches, and I had to bring the energy through, and
Hmm.
pretty much a Reiki attunement, not quite, but pretty much a Reiki attunement on the tree. And I was like, but surely the tree doesn't need this. But there were other places in nature where I was guided to kind of like bring energy in with permission. Like I didn't want to like come in and change things. Like it didn't feel like I wanted to force things on the land, but it was the land asking you to do it, really. And I realized after a while that I was clearing a lot of the the energy. So Australians, the Indigenous Australian, they were a peaceful people, and all the massacres and everything that happened afterwards, you know, it was largely from the English people that happened, and it's such a recent part of their history. It's quite shocking when you realise how much was still going on in recent times, like in our lifetimes.
Mm.
Aboriginal people were considered flora and fauna, not actual people, up until I think it was 1978. It was in the late 70s when they were actually recognised really as not just being flora and fauna. And there was such a lot of terrible things that happened over there. And a lot of their people were massacred. And I didn't realise until I was speaking to Lewis about this, but I'd tell him the places where I'd been doing the work, and he's like, yeah, that's a massacre site. Yeah, that's a massacre site.
Wow.
So I had permission from him to do the work on the land, because that was the other thing as well. I didn't want to just do it really without permission, but I was guided really by Gaia to do things. Now, when I told him, there was one particular spot, and I remember writing about it in my book. And this was something that came from my imagination. This wasn't something that happened. But there was a particular spot, and I remember riding my bike past and just looking over and thinking, that energy there is really funky. And there was this patch of land where nothing grew. Around it, weeds would grow, but there was this patch and there was never anything that grew on the land there. And so that was also where the whaling station was. I thought, because, you know, after I finished this, remind me about the whales, because I got a message about that as well.
Okay.
But I'd written about that spot in the book, and in the book all this like energy was coming out, and it was like coming out as weapons and with landing in people, and they'd like get an instant headache. And there's other bits to the story that I won't go into as a spoiler alert, but I realised that what I'd written about in the book, we actually had to do. So I gathered my housemates at the time, and the number of people in the house was 6. The number of characters in the book was 6. I was Lavina, the character, because when I wrote about her, she was an English nurse. She looked like me. Although I was describing someone in my third eye that wasn't me, if you read it on paper, you'd be like, Denise, that's you. Daniel and Daisy, there were 2 people in the house. Daniel and Daisy were twins. There were 2 people living in the house that both had like dark dreadlocks. So they played the role of the twins as it was laid out in the book. And other people like just fitted into the right number of males and females as well. So my housemates kind of humoured me, and we did a crystal grid, and we intended to clear that spot. When we finished, a magpie walked in, grabbed one of the crystals, walked off with it. Now, a magpie represents balance. It's black and white. I love animals, by the way, and the messages from animals and what they represent has always been, you know, important to me since I started on this journey. And magpies represent balance. Oh,
and here we have an animal that felt you calling him.
So I knew that we were finished when the magpie came and like took one of the stones away, which the magpie did just drop it on the ground. It wasn't one of my crystals either. It was one of my housemates, so she was quite relieved. And also in the story, I'd said that one of the crystals needed to be pushed into the ground, and that was one of my favourite crystals. But I knew, because I'd written that actually had to happen. So when I told Lewis about this, he told me that it was a massacre site as well.
Oh,
And he asked me to do some more work on it. And he said, you need 21 people, you need 3 circles of 7, and you're going to bring energy in to help clear the land. So I was, I thought this would be a good experience for some of the backpackers to experience this because it's quite unusual. So I was trying to get exactly 21 people to come. And it's like herding cats, trying to herd backpackers. They're such free spirits, it's not going to happen. So in the end, I just thought, I know Lewis is giving me this guidance, but if I can't do I'll just do my best. If we don't get 21 people, I'll be guided as to what to do instead. We had exactly 21 people turn up on the day. So, we
mm,
had the 3 groups of 7. Interestingly, there were 14 women and seven men. We didn't split it that way, but I just thought that was an interesting thing in the numbers. And then Lewis played ditch on the land when we finished. And one of where I was living at the time, there was an Aboriginal family that lived there, and the youngest child, I think he was only about 2. And when Lewis finished playing ditch, he ran across the land, and it just seemed like nobody asked him to. He just decided to run across the land. It just seemed so right. First of all, that I'd gathered people from overseas, not all from England, from many different places, but it just seemed so right that people from overseas were there to correct some of the distortion that had happened and was caused by people overseas. Like there was something, full circle about that. There was something very right about that. And then for him to run across the land as one of the
mm.
youngest members of the community as well was just amazing.
Wow. That's a powerful story.
Mm,
Now, can you do something like that remotely?
yeah.
Okay, interesting. I was just it's reminding me of I felt like on my recent trip that I just returned from that we spoke about before I got on here. There was some really funky energy going on in that town that I was in, and I really felt like well, I know lots of bad things happened there, and then I did a little bit more digging and found that even more bad things happened there. Um, so it needs some healing and clearing. So it's good to know that can be done remotely.
Yeah. Yeah. You don't really have to be on the land to do it and sometimes it's easier not to be.
Mm.
Um, I used to do, I haven't done it so much in this country, but I would sometimes do work in people's houses, like, when they could just feel presences in the houses and they knew that energy was a bit funky in the houses. So that was something that I used to do in Australia.
Mm.
And it started just doing it. I actually did the whole backpackers one time as well. Um, but it started because you just do it yourself in your own space. Sometimes you just feel there's energy there, and in the corners of the room where it gets a bit stuck at that right angle, that the energy, because it moves in spirals, gets a bit stuck there. Um, and it's layers. Sometimes when you're doing work on the land, it doesn't necessarily clear the whole thing because it sometimes deeper distortions come up. You've like cleared the top layer, and it used to take it out of me quite a bit doing houses and doing land work because it's so huge. It's way bigger than a human body. It goes a lot deeper.
It's almost like its own entity,
Mm,
that it takes on a form of like an entity. Because
yeah,
I left that town and went back to our Airbnb, which was a few towns over, and it was like a switch went off, and I'm like, "What just happened? Was I
mm,
possessed?" Because it was that dramatic, that from how I felt when I was there to when I left.
Yeah, and I think we do pick things up. If we go to those places, it's like my Reiki Master used to describe it as if you go into a coal house with a white suit on, it's going to get a little bit dirty. So, sometimes we do pick things up because we can transmute it as well. And we do get, you know, we can pick up hitchhikers sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah, I know that well. My husband brings them home all the time. Not so much anymore, but yes. Now you're gonna share something about the whales with us
Mm.
before we go today.
So, my last summer there, when they were going north, I was trying to take photos of them. And I really want to be able to communicate with animals. Sometimes I do. There was a wallaby I connected with one. I was singing, and it just stopped what it was doing. I was singing as I was walking through, and this wallaby just had this blade of grass in its mouth, and it was just like listening to the light language. And we had these beautiful moments together. And I think it was the same group of wallabies taught me that if you put your left hand down like that and your right hand up like this when you go to greet an animal you don't know, that was kind of like a way of peace, a way of connecting with them. So the wallaby taught me that. But the whales, I think it's quite easy to connect telepathically with whales because they're so immense. It just seems easier to do it with whales, I think, than any other creatures. And I was asking them, I think I'd seen kayaks going out because they have like whale spotting kayaking trips. And sometimes the whales would come up really close. And if they wanted to, they could easily tip the kayaks over. And I just kind of said to them, you don't seem to have any detrimental feelings towards the humans, but you must know what the humans did to you in the recent history. Like, some of you may still be alive, but the knowledge would have been passed down. And they said, we're not carrying the energy of that. You are still the humans, but we've actually let all that go. And it was really beautiful. And there is often this feeling of we're the children and the animal kingdom. It's the wrong way round. They're the wise ones, actually, is on a collective level. And it is kind of like, oh, what have they done now kind of thing, that child energy, the way that they think of us.
So pure.
And it felt right. It felt, yeah, that was how they were. They're such beautiful beings. Humpbacks.
Yes. Before we leave today, can you share any light language with us?
Yeah, I'd love to.
Okay.
I'd love to. Thank you. Thank you for asking. So I'll just ask us to bring our awareness to our heart space to start with. Breathing into the heart and spreading the love from your heart all over your body. And connecting our hearts to the heart of Gaia, the heart of the sun, and the heart of Source Creator. Ihayan lekiant oya nemma at und kalakita it ust at ante ki mahal it hunukula baleki neist orenta baleki lukula ikid und oik ke alakia mohuya hand kimpili I doist malekia barnt onana det oyakia Kulekian uyeshta. Kianai ai 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 ai. kule eost und ui kalakrunuko. Bele kit a bele kia hai enakola unukuist a paranako ui a bele ala nekid ui pa lekia tanakid ui a pe alekia anokui totui tatan mele horinakid ui tot uist a Ilakion uit da manaios ut da Orlakian dekid uist Malahe ai kut uit kel u da abrudu kut uit da Inu tatu ikad uist ta Id tu horna ita ut da Nanti lepe ara tu kutu parati kita ko tu uist ta Maya otohi hat o tata ki alaka yahant o yest tata. So just breathing again into our hearts. And just being open to releasing anything that our body is ready to let go of. Being open to the energies.
That was beautiful. Thank you for that. It felt very elemental and then like it went into galactic. Is that how it felt for you?
Yeah, and it felt quite what I feel when I'm speaking light language is that there's actually many frequencies coming through at the same time, but it's almost like one is kind of standing ahead of the others, if that makes sense. So it felt very, very feminine in the beginning, like soft, that kind of rose energy, that sisters of the rose energy, that Sophia kind of energy. But yeah, there was definitely some elemental stuff in there too. And what was coming through at the end, some of that is fairly new to me. I haven't quite sussed that one yet. And I try not to, I don't say this is Pleiadian Lyran or whatever. It almost feels like that pigeonholes it a little bit, like compresses it a little bit. And I can't always differentiate because I can feel many frequencies coming through at the same time. I can't always, subdivide it so much.
Now, is
And
there a message that came through with that you can interpret?
no, I tend not to interpret. What I feel happens is that everybody who receives it receives a different fractal of the whole message. So somebody might hear a message and it might be completely different from a message that somebody else hears, and they're both right because they're receiving from it what is right for them. Usually I find there's something in the body, whether it's that on hearing this, the body, it's geometry, and it's kind of like original blueprints, or the blueprint, activating the blueprints within us that are ready to be coming online now. If someone on a higher self level is ready for that, it's not like I make that happen in somebody. I just bring the frequencies through for the ones that are going to listen, and then their body takes care of the rest. And I'm doing this in the garden now as well. Like I kind of feel like I'm coming out a little bit. I've had one YouTube channel in a piece with Denise for a while, and I'm doing this other one, and I feel it's going to be a little bit more to do with, like, I've done some videos that are like gardening with light codes, and I'm coming out like singing to the plants and the saying what I do with the energy of the land, like
Oh, I
as
love
I'm
that.
putting the plants in and stuff. So yeah, this is kind of what I'm quite busy with at the moment, doing videos and trying to like not be so almost clinical with my videos, trying to make them a bit more pretty and learning new skills with editing videos and putting things together. And I haven't yet put music with them, but I'd like to, put some music underneath. And yeah, so there's a real right brain, left brain thing going on with these at the moment. And when I first started editing, it was like, oh, drove me nuts. But this last one that was quite a challenging one, it was definitely a left brain, like trying to work out how to do things. Because when I started the video, I was stumbling over my words. It was a really shoddy beginning of a video. And I thought if I watched that, I'd turn off straight away. I was like, oh, I'm going to have to do something. So yeah, I stuck some other like footage in and then recorded myself saying it properly and that kind of thing. So it was, yeah, it was an interesting experience for me. But I'm really enjoying doing that. I did up the garden because it was quite overgrown when I first got it in the summer house. So there's a bit of a vlog sequence that I'm working through with that. So yeah, that's where I'm
Well,
going
we
at the
will
moment.
make sure to post that below. And then is
Thank you.
there anything else you want to let people know about that we can post below too on what you have going on?
Yeah, sure. So I do. There's a couple of regular things that I do every month. One I call a frequency chamber soundscape. So that's where on one of them we go through the body and really quite in-depth body scan of the physical body, the energy centers as well. But with my nursing, I can kind of like pretty much name the body. So we do quite a thorough scan of the body, and in that we're looking and correcting things, and then there's time to go back, and I speak light language and sing with that. So that's once a month, and I have another one that is often a theme. Merlin always seems to want to get in on the action on that one, and the Sisters of the Rose, like Mary Magdalene. And I often put Merlin and Mary Magdalene together. And when that first started coming through, I was like, surely it would be Yeshua and Mary Magdalene, but it's like it works really well, Merlin and Mary Magdalene. So there's often like a rose themed or Sisters of the Rose or something to do with that, which is,
Mm.
yeah, where people can receive in that. And the other thing that I do every couple of weeks is a new Earth Grid octahedron. So this was Morgan Lee's octahedron work that she started offering. So I've been going to her sessions, and with her permission, I've started doing them myself now. So that's every 2 weeks. So one is on a Monday, and one is the following week on a Tuesday, and it just alternates between those two. Um, and I don't really advertise the New Earth Grid octahedron calls so much, but the others I just advertise on my page. So my business page name on Facebook is Denise's Frequency of Love page, which is a bit of a mouthful, but I can never think of a shorter, better name to change it to. And the other one is just Denise Chadwick. And yeah, it's probably easier just to click follow if you want to like, follow the work that I do there. I don't as yet have a website, but that's where I advertise my stuff generally on Facebook at the moment.
Beautiful. Denise, it was such a pleasure to have you on today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed it. It's been really lovely.
It
Lovely being in
was
your presence and chatting. So yeah, keep up with this. Oh, I also do a Love Speaks Love show occasionally as well, but I was doing it every week, but yeah, that's on my Inner Peace with Denise when I do that. So I
awesome.
know what it takes to put these on. So yeah, thank you. Thank you for taking the time to do it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, thank you. And we will say goodbye for now to everyone. Goodbye.
Bye everybody. Thank you.